Hey guys, welcome back to the College Predictor, Week 7 college football predictions. And we're going to start off with something way different than we've done any other week. And these 14 helmets are the 14 teams with the highest odds to make the playoffs. In order, it's number 1, Oklahoma, Ohio State, Georgia, Oregon, Texas, Alabama, Michigan, Penn State, Florida State, Washington are the top 10. And then 11 is USC, 12 is North Carolina, and then Louisville and Ole Miss rounded up. So for the starter, to start this video, I'm going to say which teams do I think can make the playoffs and why not. Let's start off with Michigan since they're on the front of the screen. Michigan, they have 2 games that are threatening to them, and that's Penn State and Ohio State. If they lose one of those games, then they are most likely not to make the conference championship. Michigan, they're going to have to play really good against Ohio State. It helps that they're at home this year, so that could be a really big factor, although they have to go on the road to Penn State. So the odds that they lose one of those games is pretty high. So I believe Michigan will not make the playoffs, so we could take them off for now. Our next team is Ohio State. I mean, they have a super talented team, but will their receivers be able to go against Penn State and Michigan's defense? I mean, it's that kind of triangle in the Big Ten between Penn State, Michigan, and Ohio State. It's those 3 teams that are threatening in the Big Ten, and whichever one of those teams makes the conference championship and ultimately wins it is going to be the team, the number 1 seed in the playoffs. Ohio State has good chances to win both those games. If they do, they'll easily breeze the conference championship. So if Ohio State can win out, they're going to make the playoffs as a lock. So Ohio State has a very, very good chance to make the playoffs. ESPN says 52%. I'm going to give them about a 59% to make the playoffs. Michigan, I'm giving a 32%. Next team is North Carolina. I mean, they're lucky that they don't have to play Florida State this year, but they have to play Clemson, Duke, and Miami. I'm not worried about Miami. Based off what I saw against Georgia Tech, they're going to be fine against Miami. I think Duke could be challenging since it's a rivalry game, and that game against Clemson is going to be entertaining. I expect them to be favorites in all those games, but will they execute? Will North Carolina be able to win when it matters? Will Drake May be able to play good enough? And will their defense perform in the big moments? I don't think they will, so I think they're going to lose 2 games at least, and most likely to Clemson and Duke. But if they can win out and win the conference championship, you might see a basketball blue blood in the playoffs. Next team's Oregon. If Oregon can win every game, which they have an incredibly tough schedule, then they're going to be fine. They have to beat Washington, which is going to be tough on the road, and they have to beat USC, which as of now doesn't look too tough because USC is not playing good, and then they have to beat Utah. Their one challenging game is going to be on Saturday against Washington. On the road, if they could win that game, that will be a thrust for the rest of their season. That should lead Bo Nix to be electric the rest of the year. I think Troy Franklin will be a difference maker if they want to make the playoffs. And if they can win out, they're going to make the playoffs. That's a guarantee. Their schedule is so hard that if they win every game, they're going to be a 1 seed guarantee. Our next team is Louisville. Didn't think I'd ever see them in a top 14 playoff list, but here we are. They just came off a huge win against the Notre Dame Fighting Irish at home. But their schedule is tough, but not horrible. They have to play Duke, Miami, and Kentucky as their 3 hardest games. If they lose one of them, they're not going to make the playoffs. And here's my reasoning. Louisville, they're a very under-expected team. They didn't have high expectations. 1 loss is going to ruin their whole season. Just like in 2021, if Cincinnati had lost a game, they would have no chance. They have to play Kentucky. It's at home, though. So their biggest threat is going to be on the road at Miami. But if they could win out, that would be huge for them. But they're not going to win out. Louisville I would give them like an under 10% chance to make the playoffs. And I'll just do a quick breeze through between these last teams. Ole Miss, they have too hard of a schedule to make the playoffs. Even if they do make the SEC championship, they're going to meet the hands of Georgia. One more loss and they're out. So Ole Miss, I don't think they have a chance to make the playoffs. Oklahoma, very good chances. They just beat Texas off an incredible game. That game is definitely top 5 worthy by the end of the year. And their schedule from here is incredibly easy, as they have the highest odds to make the playoffs. So Oklahoma, their biggest threat is going to be probably Texas in the conference championship if they make it. Oklahoma has good odds to make the playoffs. USC, I'm just going to say they're not making it. They only beat Arizona State by 2 points in overtime at home. Arizona and USC, Caleb Williams has been playing great, but I don't think he's going to be able to carry USC to wins against Oregon, Washington, Utah. I don't think there's a chance for them to win every single one of those games. And even if they slip one up, they're probably not going to make the conference championship. USC, they're not making it. Washington, it's the same thing. Can they win the 2 big games against Oregon and USC? If they do and they win the conference championship, again, that's definitely a 1-seed lock. Texas, they have to win out. That's for sure. 1 loss and they're gone. And then they're going to have to win the conference championship. If that happens, they're looking at a 98% chance to make the playoffs. Georgia, their schedule's easy from here. Their hardest game's against Tennessee, which is a 71% win percentage. I will be at that game. And Georgia's hardest opponent's most likely going to be in the conference championship, which is most likely going to be Alabama, LSU, or Ole Miss. Georgia's going to win out. They're going to make the playoffs. No doubt in my mind. Florida State, they got their 2 hardest games out of the way, LSU and Clemson. They don't have that tough of a schedule. Their worst game is going to be at Florida. They're going to win out. They're going to win the conference championship. Florida State makes the playoffs as a 2 seed. Bama, they're not making the playoffs. Based on how interesting their team's been this year, only being South Florida by 14. I don't know about Alabama. They have a tough schedule still, as they still have to play LSU and Tennessee. I do think they're going to win both those games, but it's going to come down. If they make the conference championship, will they beat Georgia? I say they won't. That would make them 2 losses on the year. They're not making the playoffs. And lastly, Penn State. It's that triangle in the Big Ten. If they can win all those games, they're making the playoffs. Simple as that. All right, that was a long segment, but let's get to our first game, which is going to be between, we could go ahead and keep Alabama on there, because Alabama is facing the Razorbacks. Actually, Alabama's at home. We'll move them over there. Arkansas at Alabama. I think Arkansas is an underrated team based off their record, which, as we know, is horrible. They haven't been playing good. They've been sloppy with the ball, and they haven't been able to execute the big moments. As we've seen against BYU, their defense hasn't been good. Ole Miss, they could have won that game if they were more careful with the ball and didn't force everything. Meanwhile, Alabama, they're having a very interesting season. Their 1 loss was to Texas, who is a great football team, but then South Florida came along and they only won by 14. So there's quarterback questions, but I think Jalen Milroe has proven himself a little bit. And the reason I wanted to include this game is how underrated I believe Arkansas is talent-wise. They have talent. Their record doesn't show it. They need Rocket Sanders to rehab. They need him to get 100% healthy, and they need him to go off in this game if they want any chance to win. Alabama is at home, so that's a lot tougher for Arkansas. And as at home, Alabama is a 19.5-point favorite. I think Arkansas is going to compete in this game, but I think Alabama is still going to win by a lot. Arkansas will not cover the spread. Alabama will win by 20. It's going to be a blowout for the Crimson Tide. Let's go to our next game, which is the Tuesday night game, Appalachian State versus Coastal Carolina. This is my first Tuesday game, and the first Tuesday game of the year. So I thought, why not predict it? It's going to be a good expected game. These are the two top teams. Well, not by conference rankings, but they're two very consistent teams in the Sun Belt Conference. App State, we know they could win big games. They've back-to-back years where they've almost beat North Carolina, who is 12th ranked in the nation right now. And Coastal Carolina, they're not doing too good right now. They're 2-3 on the year. And conference play, they're 0-2. So I don't think they're having a great year so far, especially looking at their two wins against Duke Wentz and Jacksonville State. One of their losses did go to UCLA, but when you look at their wins, they haven't won against great teams. So App State is the better team in this situation. And as of that, they're 6-point favorites at home. But these teams are pretty big rivals as they normally are competing to be the top of the Sun Belt. So Coastal, App State, I'm going to go App State, 6-point favorites, win this game by 3. So Coastal Carolina will cover the spread. Let's go to our next game, which I already mentioned is the biggest one of Saturday. The Washington Huskies, the Oregon Ducks. Washington's at home this year, which is huge because they're going to need the atmosphere. They're going to need the crowd to help them. This is the 8th ranked versus 7th ranked. It doesn't get better than this in Pac-12. The winner of this game will most likely go on to be the Pac-12 championship. And whoever wins this game, I believe, could leap Oklahoma for the highest odds to make the playoffs. Who will it be? It's a great quarterback matchup, Bo Nix versus Michael Penix. It's a great wide receiver head-to-head with Rome Ostuns on one side for Washington and Troy Franklin for Oregon on the other. This game's going to come down to which defense can stop the other team's electric quarterback first. Who has the better defense? I'm going to go Washington. A couple stops could be the difference in this game, and I believe Washington will be able to get those stops. But they're going to need Braylon Trice, their superstar defensive end, to have a great game in order for that to happen. I say he will, because the Oregon offensive line, they're solid, but they haven't really been tested too much this year. Washington at home, 2.5-point favorites, win this game by a last-second field goal, 3 points. Let's go to our next game, which is between the Missouri Tigers, who just came off the loss to LSU, and the Kentucky Wildcats, who are newly ranked. Kentucky is at home in this game, and they're now ranked 24th, so that's huge for them. Missouri, I don't think they deserve to be dropped all the way down the rankings. I mean, they lost their first game, and it was to LSU. You can't really blame them for that. And the score looks a lot over-bloated because it was a last-second pick six that wouldn't have changed the outcome either way. I still think Missouri is a very talented football team. Brady Cook has been playing awesome, but when you need a big-time moment, a big-time player to make that moment a good one, you need a good kicker. That's what Missouri has, and Harrison Mevis. He's been having a great year, as we remember the 61-yarder against Kansas State. That was huge for him. I think Luther Burden III, if he has a good game against Kentucky, Missouri's going to be the winner of this game. And I say Missouri will win this game. Missouri in this game is a 2.5-point underdog. They're going to win this game by 7, and they're going to find themselves ranked next week. Let's go to the next game, which is between the Notre Dame Fighting Irish at home, which is absolutely huge for them, against the 10th-ranked USC Trojans. This game has a lot of hype going into it. Both teams are super, super solid. USC's been scaring me recently. They've only beat subpar teams by little margins. We saw on Saturday night, they only beat Arizona by a 2-point conversion in overtime. And they only beat Colorado who I think is a talented football team, but they only beat them by 7 after being up a lot. So questions about their defense is the problem for USC. I mean, we know Lincoln Riley's an offensive whiz, and that's really what he focuses on. But in the Pac-12 and college football in general, you're not going to win without defense. That's what USC lacks. And Notre Dame has a great offense. So it's going to be a very high-scoring game. It's in Notre Dame, so that actually makes them 2.5-point favorites. And can Sam Hartman bounce back after this horrible performance against Louisville? I think he can. And I also think Audric Estime will have a bounce-back game. And because I don't really like USC, I'm going to go Notre Dame in this game. 2.5-point favorites. They're going to win this game by 10. I don't believe it's going to be a close game. Notre Dame has full control. Let's go to our next game, which is between the Syracuse Orange and the number 4 ranked Florida State Seminoles. I included this game on this list just because Syracuse has a good record, 4-2. And I think Syracuse is an underrated team. I mean, they have a great quarterback, Garrett Schrader, but that's not going to be enough when you're playing the number 4 team in the nation, Florida State. I mean, you look everywhere on their team, and there's talent. Questions at quarterback? Nope, you got Jordan Travis. Running back, you got Trey Benson. Wide receiver, you got Johnny Wilson and Keon Coleman. And at tight end, you have Jaheim Bell. So there's talent everywhere on this team. And their defense has been playing lights out recently. It's their defensive line getting to the quarterback. But the defensive line kind of take the credit from the DBs who've been guarding receivers very tightly, allowing the quarterback to make indecisive decisions, and therefore let Jared Verse and their other talented defensive ends make the plays. Florida State's defense is going to ball out against Syracuse, and they're going to win by a large margin. At home, Florida State's a 17.5-point favorite. This game is going to end up being a domination. Florida State, 27-point win. Next game, between two very, very talented teams. One being the Tennessee Volunteers, who are at home against the Texas A&M Aggies. These are both interesting teams. Texas A&M's out of the playoff conversation. Technically, Tennessee isn't. Tennessee is 4-1, so this is a must-win game for them. This will really get their season back on track. And they're going to need a good game. Will their defense step up? I mean, every game I said, it's always about the defenses. But both these teams have great offenses, we know that. But their defense hasn't been really hurt as much as their offense. So that's a question. Joe Milton, he has to have a good game. I mean, he's been solid for Tennessee, but he's been inconsistent as well. Meanwhile, Texas A&M, one of their 2 losses was to Alabama, who is highly ranked. But if you look at their resume at the end of the year, you're going to see they lost to Miami, who lost to Georgia Tech. That's not going to help Texas A&M if they want to get in a high bowl game. So I think Texas A&M, if they want to play on New Year's Day or New Year's Eve, this is a game they have to win. It's going to be tough on the road, though. And I don't think Texas A&M has the talent to do so. I mean, they have a really, really talented team. I think Max Johnson should be the starter this game, the 6'6" quarterback from Athens, Georgia. He's been doing a solid year. He's been not bad, but not like Jordan Travis or Caleb Williams. But he has a lot of people to throw to. He has Moose Mohammed, Anaya Smith, Jalen Preston. I mean, their receivers are incredible. Noah Thomas. And I think their wide receivers could be the difference in this game. And that's why I'm going to go with the upset here. Tennessee is a 3.5-point favorite at home. Texas A&M is going to win this game by, we'll go 6. I think it's going to be a 2-field goal win. Next game, Friday night, West Virginia at Houston. It's a new Big 12 team against a veteran Big 12 team. West Virginia's been having a sneakily good season. As of now, their record sits at a very, very solid 4-1. That's great, but they still have to play Texas and Oklahoma. They're not making the playoffs. Meanwhile, Houston's at a losing record in 2-3, 0-2 in the Big 12, and they really want to get their season turned around. The problem, they don't have the talent like West Virginia does. Remember last year they lost their two best players to the draft in Clayton Tune and their number one wide receiver in Tank Dell. So their team is not the best. And neither is their defense. Meanwhile, West Virginia has a very, very talented offense, and it's led by Hudson Clement, the 6'1" wide receiver from Martinsburg, West Virginia, who is a freshman. He's been tearing up defenses for West Virginia. That he's going to be the difference maker in this game, and I believe that's why West Virginia on the road is actually a favorite. 3-point favorites. West Virginia win this game by 14. Let's go to our next game, which is in the swamp between South Carolina. Excuse me, it's not in the swamp. It's in the most electric place in college football. Florida Gators at South Carolina. We know South Carolina is a very rowdy place, a very hard place to play. And both these teams are very good, unranked SEC teams. I mean, you look in the SEC and you expect a good team to be ranked. People often forget about the very talented teams that aren't ranked. This includes Missouri, Florida, South Carolina, South Carolina isn't having a best season, but they still have talent. They have Spencer Rattler, and if he can play good on a day-to-day basis, South Carolina could be in the top 10 right now. But the problem, he's very inconsistent. And Florida, they have a inconsistent quarterback of their own in Graham Mertz. And this is going to be a quarterback-wide receiver battle because they both have very similar quarterbacks and very similar wide receivers. In Florida, having Ricky Pearsall, who's been the number one option for Graham Mertz all year, and South Carolina having Antoine, a.k.a. Juice Wells, who's also been the main guy for South Carolina. Well, Florida doesn't have a great, which South Carolina has an amazing, is wide receiver 2, and Xavier Legette. So Florida's going to have to make sure to keep an eye on both, but they're also going to forget about the slot and the tight end, and even the running back out of the backfield. South Carolina's going to outwork Florida in this game, and they're going to end up winning this game as 2-point favorites. South Carolina wins this game by 9. Next game between two also very solid, unranked Big Ten teams. Iowa at Madison, Wisconsin to take on the Badgers. Both these teams have been solid and not amazing. They're very weird teams. Wisconsin is number 1 in the Big Ten West, and they're sitting at a 4-1. Their one loss was to Washington State. Meanwhile, Iowa is sitting at 5-1. Their one loss to Penn State. So both these teams have pretty good resumes because their one loss has been to good teams, especially considering they were both on the road. So the winner of this game will 100% move up to number 1 in the West. Who will it be? Who has more talent in this game? Will Cade McNamara have a great game for Iowa, the Michigan transfer? And will Wisconsin's offense be able to keep up with Iowa's offense? Their team is very solid, and I really like their transfer quarterback from SMU, Tanner Mordecai. He has a great story from backing up in Oklahoma to starting at SMU, setting school records, and now being a starter for a Big Ten team. This game's going to come down to the wire. Which team can make the last stop? And I believe it will be Iowa. I think Iowa is the better team in this game, even though they're 10-point underdogs on the road. I'm saying Iowa, big upset, 7-point win. Find themselves number 1 in the Big Ten West. Next game, the night game for UCLA, who just came off the win against ranked Washington State, on the road against Oregon State, who is currently sitting at 15. This is going to be a great game between two very highly ranked teams, very talented teams, but UCLA, they've been a very solid team, but they've had very questionable quarterback play. I mean, their one loss to Utah, they only put up 7 points. And I don't think it was all Utah's defense, based off seeing Dante Moore throwing a pick six to a linebacker on the first game. Meanwhile, Oregon State, they have a very interesting quarterback. They have DJ Uiagalelei, and he's been doing a great season so far. I think he's been showing that he still has it in him. But will he be able to show it against a ranked team? He already did once against Utah. Can he do it against a Pac-12 ranked team consistently? That's what Oregon State needs. That's what they've needed for a long time. And I think the reason they're 15th ranked is the margins that they've been winning by. I mean, you're looking at 42-17, 55-7, 26-9. They lost to Washington State, and they beat Utah by 14. So Oregon State's been having a very good season. And what I think is interesting about this team is their two quarterback scheme. I mean, you have DJ Uiagalelei and Aiden Chili's. Both are thrown into the game for different situations. I think Aiden Chili's is a more short down run, dual threat option. DJ Uiagalelei is our main guy. Oregon State at home, 4.5-point favorites. I don't know. I think they're going to win this game by exactly 4. This is going to be a very interesting, close game. All right. So that's the games for this week. Actually, there's one more. And this game could be the best one of this week. At home, the North Carolina Tar Heels, who are now all the way up to 12th ranked, against the Mr. What am I doing? What is this team doing? Miami Hurricanes. I just want to take a quick moment to talk about what the heck Miami did against Georgia Tech. They could have kneeled the ball, walked out with the win, and if they did, they'd be sitting at 5-0, not 4-1. But, of course, Miami wants to be fancy. They want to raise their players' draft stocks, and fumble! Georgia Tech recovers, and then the Hail Mary throw, wide open. Their defense blew coverage, and that makes Miami 25th ranked. I think if they won that game, they could have been in the top 15. Instead, they're not. This game's at North Carolina, which is going to be tough for Miami since North Carolina, they aren't going to play a really good team until Miami today because their schedule hasn't been the best. The best team they've played so far is South Carolina. North Carolina has the best player in the ACC, potentially, in Drake May, who's been having a great year so far. Miami, they have had an inconsistent quarterback in Tyler Van Dyke, so they're going to need to run the ball with Henry Parrish Jr. plenty this game. Meanwhile, North Carolina's defense has been playing very, very good as they're 5-0. North Carolina's defense is going to be the difference maker, and Miami's going to turn the ball over plenty. So I think because of the turnovers, Miami on the road as 3.5-point underdogs will lose this game by 13. Now, I saved the shout-outs for the end. We'll start off with quarterback for the North Carolina Tar Heels, Drake May, who on the win against Syracuse, he threw for 442 yards, 3 touchdowns, and no picks, finishing the game with a 170.3 rating. Our next shout-out goes to E.J. Warner, the quarterback for Temple, which in a loss to UTSA, he somehow was the best quarterback with 472 yards, 5 touchdowns, to no picks, which I don't understand how he has a lower rating than Drake May, which is a 1-51, probably because they lost. But even though they lost, heck of a performance. And our last one, Northern Illinois running back, Antario Brown. He had a great game for a small school in their 55-14 win at Akron. He ran for 280 yards and 4 touchdowns. But here's my most impressive part. He did that all in 13 carries, leaving his yards per carry at a 21 and a half. That's almost unheard of. So I think he could be a difference maker for Northern Illinois if they want to make a bowl game. Thank you for watching this video. It was a very different video as we went through the playoff teams and saved the shoutouts for last. Comment down below which team do you think is going to make the playoffs and which team do you think is going to win the championship. All right. I'd like to see you guys interact with the comments more. Have fun watching college football this week. And until then, see you.